So, it's confession time. So during Sunday school class today, we were watching Francis Chan, and Francis Chan said that sometimes, if we were really honest with ourselves, we would miss some of the easiest lessons ever taught. And I gotta be honest and say, I have definitely missed out on probably one of the most important lessons, and that's living generously. Sometimes I read it and I'm like, oh wow, that's cool, you know, they gave some, and I skim by it. I don't really let that impact my life. And my word of the year, I've never done this before, but I decided I was going to do it this year, but my word of the year this year is generosity. And I said, well, we're starting a new year, so let's start off a new year with generosity. God can ask us sometimes to do some really crazy things, can't he? I mean, he could do, and he could say, I want you to do something very unique. And we might not expect what he's saying. I mean, he might say, hey, I really want you to step out of your comfort zone. And I want you to go do something that you might not necessarily want to do. He might say, hey, I want you to go someplace, to travel somewhere, be a missionary somewhere. And you might say, I could do that, but just not there. Anywhere but there, God. He might say, well, you know, go and talk to a certain people group. And you might think, well, I can talk to most people, but not that group. I don't want to talk to them. But he might ask us to do something that might raise our eyebrows. He might lay on our hearts to simply pay for the person's meal who's behind you in the drive-thru. He might say, hey, I want you to pay for someone's groceries and money's kind of tight, but what a blessing it would be for that other person. God might ask you to simply share a story or a moment in your life in which God's moving and it gives hope to somebody else. God can ask some very crazy things sometimes. And there's a Bible story in which God tells that's kind of crazy. In the book of Mark, in chapter 6, in verses 30 to 44, we see that story. And this is the story. It says this. The apostles gathered around Jesus and reported to him all that they had done and taught. Then because so many people were coming and going that they had not had a chance to eat, and he said to them, come with me by yourselves to go to a quiet place and get some rest. So they went away by themselves in a boat to a solitary place. But many who saw them leaving recognized them and ran on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. When Jesus landed and he saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them. And because they were like sheep without a shepherd. So he began teaching them many things. By this time it was late in the day, so the disciples came to him. This is a remote place, they said. It's already very late. Send the people away to the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat. But he answered, you give them something to eat. They said to him, that would take more than half a year's wages. Are we to go and spend that much money on bread and give it to them to eat? How many loaves do we have? He asked. Go and see. When they found out, they said 5 and 2 fish. Then Jesus directed them to tell them how the people sit in groups in the green grass. So they sat down in groups of hundreds and fifties. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves. And then he gave them to his disciples to distribute to the people. And he also divided the fish among them all. They all ate and were satisfied. And the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces of bread and fish. And the number of men who had eaten was 5,000. Wow. That's crazy. That's a crazy story, okay? I mean, Jesus and his disciples, they were out teaching and they were preaching and they were getting people to know more about what he's about. And then Jesus says, okay, maybe we should probably take a break. And so they take a break, and the people follow. They run ahead of Jesus to learn more about what is going on. And so Jesus starts teaching them. And before you know it, Jesus has realized, whoa, guess what time it is? It's like sunset time. It's supper time. And there's no way these guys are going to have time to go home yet. They have no ability to go home. So Jesus says, well, how much money do we have? The disciples say, well, not enough. I mean, it would take more than half a year's wages. Some would say even a year's wage. So Jesus asks something even crazier. And he says, okay, well, how many loaves of bread do we have? How many fish? Go and find out. And I'm sure at that moment, the disciples might be thinking, okay, Jesus, what are you going to do here? Especially when you hear that it's only 5 loaves and 2 fish. I mean, that's nothing. That's like an afternoon meal almost. I mean, that's not going to feed 5,000. And Jesus is probably thinking, that's okay, it's okay. And the disciples are like, no, Jesus, this isn't okay. I mean, when we think about it, we see that the number is 5,000 men. That doesn't say women and children. The number could have been as far as 15,000 to 20,000 or more. And the disciples probably were thinking at that moment, Jesus, you're crazy. Jesus, there's no way. And I'm sure that they were thinking a little bit of a doubtful moment there. Okay, God, I know you're good. You've done some stuff, but I don't know that you could pull this one off this time. I'm sure at this point, Peter is probably thinking of something to say. I'm sure that he's thinking of something to say. But Jesus says, it's okay. It's fine. We're good. I mean, the people realized who Jesus was. The ones who were hungry and were going to get fed, they knew who Jesus was. They had heard about him. I'm sure that that's why they were running ahead, because they had heard about all the stories of what he's done, and they were wanting to learn more. Some were probably there just to have something performed for them, just so they could see some sort of miracle. But Jesus blows the minds of his disciples. And he blows the minds of people there. And he says, give me the fish. Give me the loaves. And he blesses them. He looks up to the sky and he says, thanks. And then he says, okay, here's the food. Go and distribute the food. And they do. And they wound up having 12 baskets full of leftovers. I mean, the baskets were any wicker basket that we could think of, your regular sized wicker basket. That's how much leftovers they had. But there's another story, very, very similar to this one, that also hits the same thing. In Mark chapter 8 and verses 1 through 10, Jesus feeds 4,000. And in that passage, Jesus has been preaching for 3 days. He's been going, and he falls under compassion, and after preaching, he sees the 4,000 men, and he says, we should probably feed them. And again, you're probably looking at 12 to 15,000, if not more. And at that time, they only had 7 loaves and a few fish. And Jesus does the same thing. And everybody eats, and they're all satisfied, and then they collect it, and then they have 7 large baskets full. I mean, they were large baskets. Like an average-sized human being, an average-sized human male can fit into one of those baskets. So they were huge baskets. I mean, it's crazy that Jesus does this miracle twice. But it's even crazier when we think about what the significance is for us. Both the passages have something very common. The feeding of the 4,000, the feeding of the 5,000, they have something very, very common if we look at it and take that time to study. Both of those stories start with something small. The feeding of the 5,000 only had 5 loaves and 2 fish, and the feeding of the 4,000 had 7 loaves and a few fish. They didn't have a lot. Started out very, very small. Passage just didn't say, hey, they had a year's worth of bread and a year's worth of fish. No, they had something really small. Almost to the point of thinking that this is never going to happen. I mean, Jesus didn't look at Judas and say, hey, Judas, here's what we're going to do. Okay, here's the game plan. Go out to the market, buy a year's worth. We're good. We'll be fine. Don't worry. My parents they'll supply it for us. I mean, Jesus didn't do that. He didn't have rich parents. Jesus himself wasn't rich. I mean, Jesus didn't have a very lucrative job. He didn't have a corner office looking out over the town. I mean, he was in the field. He was a carpenter before becoming a minister, a missionary, if you want to say that. I mean, Jesus didn't have a lot to give to others. He had hardly anything to give. But yet, he was still generous in how he gave. I'm sure that there are people in here today who are probably thinking, okay, Stephen, there is no way in the world that I'm able to give up a year's worth of wages to go feed people who are poor and hungry. I'm sure that we're thinking, there's no way that I can even possibly give up a day's wage to go and feed the poor and the hungry. I mean, there's no way, Stephen, that I can be that generous. There's no way that I can just give everything I have. There's no way that, I can repair someone's home after a major disaster. There's no way that I can pay for someone's car repair. There's no way that, I see someone who's in need of a new car. There's no way I can pay for that. Well, no, you're probably right. But I didn't write this sermon series to say, well, hey, we have to give up everything. I didn't write this series to say, hey, you guys aren't generous, because the fact is I think we talked about this today, that this is probably one of the most generous communities I've ever lived in. And this is probably one of the most generous churches that I've ever have heard about. So it's not because of that. It's because there's some significance to being generous. It's a great reminder of why we should be generous. It's a great reminder of the importance of just why we should follow that example of Jesus. So don't take it as a, hey, you guys aren't generous, because you guys are. Take it as a reminder and something to build off for the next year. I mean, can you imagine what it's like to be generous? I mean, could you imagine just giving someone an hour out of your day just to listen to what's going on in their life rather than trying to put it on someone else? Or maybe you're the one who tries to always give your life to someone else and you don't take the time to listen. Could you imagine what it would be like to invite a single mother who's struggling to come over for supper, or to say, hey, I'll take your kids for an afternoon so you can get some rest? I mean, could you imagine what a blessing it would be if you're going through that drive-thru and you say, hey, I got the meal behind me? What a blessing that would be to somebody. I mean, could you imagine what it's like to share your story about how you got through some life issue, or how you got through some addiction, to someone else who really could use hope? I mean, those are all things that we could be generous with. Those things don't take a lot. They don't require a lot from us to be generous. Generosity is defined as this. Generosity is defined as the act of having a kind spirit. So generosity boils down to sharing kindness with others. Recently, I saw this video on Facebook, and it was about this young man who was serving a table. And this gentleman who he was being served asked the waiter, he said, how has your day been today? And the young man said, it's been pretty rough. And so the guy said, I want to be a blessing to you. And so he took out a $100 bill and he said, here you go. And the young man who was waiting on the table, tears started coming. And he said, thank you. You just paid off my car. And it was such an amazing video, but I wish it would have just stopped there, but it didn't. The story kept going. The guy said, well, that's awesome. He said, my daughter told me to only tip you 40% and add a zero to it, but he said, I wanted to do more. And so he said, here's another $100. And then he encouraged the guy and said, be who you are, keep your head up, be strong. And he said, I really want to be a blessing to you. Here's another $100. Wow. I mean, that's crazy. That's huge. I mean, can you imagine what joy that young man received in his life at that moment? His day had been terrible. And yet this guy decided to be generous and pour out a blessing. But I've seen this in my own life. I remember quite vividly when I was a young tyke, I went back to my great-grandparents' house in Arkansas for my great-great-grandma's funeral. And my great-grandpa, he took us all out for supper, and I don't remember why I remember this. I think I do know why. There's a funny story with it. But I remember the story, and I remember that the bill for the meal came out to $100. I don't remember why I know that. So my grandpa, he took out a $100 bill and put it on the table for a tip. And then he went and paid. And I remember vividly, as a young boy, turning back to the table to make sure that everybody was kind of this way. And I remember looking at that waitress and just seeing her beam with joy. I mean, so much joy, it was like she was about to start hopping up and down because she was so excited to receive such an amazing tip. Generosity. I mean, those are great. I mean, those are feel-good stories. Those are great stories to make us feel good about being generous. But what does Scripture say? What does the Bible say about being generous? In Acts chapter 20 and verse 35, Paul writes this. He says, "In all things I have shown to you that by working hard, it is the way we must help the poor." And remember the words of the Lord Jesus, how he himself said, "It is more blessed to give than to receive." Wow. I mean, Paul reminds his audience, but he's also reminding us when we read this, that it's better to be a blessing than to receive. It's better to give than to take. He's reminding, hey, it's okay. We should work hard. But we should also remember those who are weak and be a blessing to them. But we're reminded that once we do this for the least of our brothers and sisters, we're also doing this for God. In the book of Matthew chapter 25 and verses 34 through 40, this is what we can read. It says this. It says, "Then the king will say to those on his right, 'Come, you are blessed by my Father. Take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me.' Then the righteous will answer him, 'Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go to visit you?' The king will reply, 'Truly, I tell you, whatever you did for the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me.'" Wow, what a reminder. What a great encouragement it is to know that whenever we help somebody else who's a little less fortunate than us, we're doing that very act for God. When we offer up generosity, we're not doing it just for ourselves, but we're offering it up as an offering to God for what He's done to us. We're bringing glory and honor to God. When we say, okay, I'm going to help someone who's less fortunate than I am. But that's not the rest of the parable. That's not all the story. The parable goes on and says, if you don't help those who are in need, if you don't do these things, then you have not done them for God. And they will go away, and they'll endure eternal punishment. But those who do these things will see eternal life. Wow, what a joy that is to see that if we do these things, we please God. We should be generous to others. We should help those who are in need. But there might be a bigger reason. There might be a larger reason as to why we should be generous. We can find that in 1 John chapter 3 and verse 17 when it says this. It says, "But if anyone has the world's goods and sees his brother in need, yet closes his heart against him, how does God's love abide in him? Maybe the bigger issue of why we should be generous is because of God's love. If we really allow God's love to flow from us, if we really truly love God, we're going to be compelled to help others. We're going to be compelled to want to help those who are less fortunate, who are in need. We're going to be compelled to want others to have what they can't have. Now, that doesn't mean that we're going to give them a new car. We're not going to give them Mercedes-Benz. But we are going to help those who are hungry, those who need clothes, those who need a listening ear. We're going to be compelled to want to do those things. Again, it doesn't necessarily just fall under finances. I don't want you to think this is all about money, because it's not just about money. But we can think about it in time and energy itself. I mean, giving someone an hour of a day to go visit somebody who might not necessarily get visited often, and just listening and enjoying their company. Wow, what a blessing that could be. Giving someone energy by going and doing something for them. Maybe someone's doing a repair on a house and they need help, and you go and offer to help them. Maybe you shovel someone's driveway for them so they don't have to. Maybe you rake their leaves. Maybe you listen to someone who's facing a life issue and you help encourage and strengthen them. Maybe you just simply go on a walk while they talk. I don't know. But we can do other stuff. We can share a story in our lives about how God's working to help encourage someone who might not necessarily have a great day. Those things don't take a lot of energy. I mean, it doesn't take much. King Solomon wrote in Proverbs chapter 19 and verse 17, he wrote this. He said, "Whoever is generous to the poor lends to the Lord, and he will repay him for his deed." Whoever is generous lends to the Lord. And God's going to repay us for that generosity. Now, it might not be the same. So if you happen to be generous and you give somebody money, you might not necessarily get money back. You might not get the meal back, but you're going to be repaid at some point. What an amazing piece of advice that is. We shouldn't be generous just because we expect something. We shouldn't simply just be generous because we're commanded to. We shouldn't just be generous because, well, Jesus said I had to be generous, or, I want to be more like Jesus, so I have to follow his example, and I guess I'll be more generous. No. We should be generous because we feel led to. We should be generous because, man, there's a lot of people who definitely are in need. We should feel generous because, man, we are so compelled by God's love to help those who are less fortunate. Generosity doesn't start with a lot. Generosity, in fact, actually starts with what you can begin with. That's all generosity starts with. Jesus doesn't command us to give up everything. I mean, the Apostle Paul does. He does right, and he says that the early church were selling everything they owned, and they were giving it away to the poor. So we could follow that example. We could all sell everything that we own and give it to the poor. But I'm not saying that that's what God's telling us to do. God has given us the example to be generous. To show generosity, to show our kindness to others who definitely are in need of us. Jesus isn't just going to say, hey, here you go, do this. Jesus wants us to be calculated and to be cheerful when we give. In 2 Corinthians chapter 9 and verse 7, this is what Paul writes. He said, each one must give as he has decided in his heart, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. When it comes to showing generosity, it doesn't have to look like $1 million. You don't have to be a multimillionaire and give all away all your money. You don't have to have a lot. You start with what you have. With the feeding of the 5,000, it had very few things, being 5 loaves and 2 fish. It was nothing. It was a very slim thing to have. But you have to decide what you're going to give. You have to be cheerful in what you're going to give. Generosity isn't something that we should just feel reluctant to do. We shouldn't say, well, okay, I see this homeless guy, I'm going to guess I'll feed him if I have to. We shouldn't feel guilty about being generous. We should decide what that is going to look like. So what's generosity going to look like for you? I mean, is it possible for you to buy somebody a newer car for themselves? I don't know. Maybe you can't do that. Maybe you're going to be willing to give up a day's wage to help feed those who are hungry. Maybe you're willing to give up a day's wage to help a family who's in need. Maybe you are willing to pay for that meal for that person in front of you or behind you. Maybe you're at the grocery store and you're willing to pay for that person's prescription medicine. Maybe it's something simple. Maybe you're willing to give up some time out of your day to go to a basketball game, or to go to a football game, or to a wrestling match, or a track meet, or a volleyball game and support our local students. Maybe you're willing to give up a Saturday afternoon of watching college football, or a Sunday afternoon of watching your favorite NFL team, and going to a play, or a musical, or a music concert for one of the kids, and supporting them in that activity. Maybe it's giving up an hour every day to listen to someone else's issues, to try and help and encourage someone else. But maybe it is that you're willing to make that ultimate sacrifice. Maybe you're willing to give up everything and sell everything and give to those in need. Those are things that you guys have to consider. Those are things that we have to decide. We can't just say, okay, God, what do you want me to do? We have to be willing to decide. Be cheerful in what we give. Maybe you're thinking to me right now, Stephen, you're kind of crazy. How am I going to do that? I want to give. I want to be more generous, but is there something that we could do a little bit easier than that? Well, yes. If there is, I'm sure there are. You could buy a pack of gum for somebody or something. That's you could call somebody on the phone and say, hey, I'm thinking about you. There you go. That's for you to decide and for you to figure out. I'm saying we should be cheerful. Jesus did that with very little. And what a blessing it was for those men and those women and those children who he fed and the feeding of the 5,000. Jesus took something very small and made it very large. Made an impact. I'm sure that we probably have all heard that story of the little boy who's walking on the beach picking up starfish, right? And if you haven't heard that story, there was a little boy who was on a beach one day with his dad, and thousands of starfish had washed up on the shore. And he started picking up starfish and throwing them back in the sea one by one. And finally his dad said, what are you doing? He says, well, I'm saving the starfish by throwing them back in the water. And his dad said, well, you can't do that for everyone. He says, no, I can't. But I did it for this one, and this one, and this one, and this one. I can only save what I can. We can only be generous with what we have. You can only be generous with what you have. You can't be overly generous. If you don't have it, then you can't be generous with it, I guess. If you don't have $1 million, you can't be generous with $1 million. But you can be generous with a little bit. I'm sure that we all have a little bit that we could be generous with. Whether that's time or energy, finances, we could all be generous with a little. Being generous can be something simple as just listening to someone's heart. To something big as helping make a major purchase. Does it matter if it means that you have to cut out a Sunday football game or Saturday college football game? They have to help somebody or support a local student in the school. Being generous is a sacrifice. And this is what Hebrews chapter 13, verse 16 says. It says, do not neglect the good to share what you have, for such sacrifices are pleasing to God. Wow. Such sacrifices are pleasing to God. Don't neglect to do good. Don't neglect to share what you have. Really, the whole point of this whole message is this. This is what it is. It's found in In 2 Corinthians chapter 9 and verse 6, it says this. The point of this is, whoever sows sparingly will reap sparingly, and whoever sows bountiful will also reap bountifully. We could be sparing, but we will only reap sparingly. Or we could be generous, and we'll have generosity on us as well. But it just starts with a little bit. You don't have to do all of it at once. This morning I'm going to invite our musicians to come back for it. We're going to prepare for our invitation song. But as I do, I'm going to give you one last example of something that you could do this week to show generosity. Megan has an aunt who, she had I think it was a stillbirth. And she lost her son 25 years ago this past December. So at Thanksgiving time, she wrote to all of the sisters, Megan's 5 aunts, and said, well, mom and 4 aunts, I guess, and said, can you do one random act of kindness 5 days a week for 5 weeks? It's 25 random acts of kindness. And all the sisters did, and at Christmas time it was a joy because we were able to read, well, we didn't read, her sister, her Megan's aunts, read all of those blessings that all the families did together. But to show our generosity, it starts on small. Maybe it's just a random act of kindness and opening a door for somebody. Giving someone 20 minutes out of your day. Paying for that small cup of coffee for somebody in front of you in the line of Casey's. It doesn't have to be big. It can be small. It doesn't have to be glorious. It doesn't have to be huge, glamorified. Be small. But be generous this week. This morning, our musicians are going to come back. And if you have a need, if you have a concern, if you have something that you want to pray about, if you have something you want to talk about, maybe a handshake, high five, fist bump, elbow bump, I don't know. If you want to talk, I'm going to be up front as we stand and sing our invitation song. I need thee every hour.